From 11-year-olds bolting for the exit to stone-faced teens laughing at grieving families, and an 18-year-old landing a contempt charge over one reckless gesture. These courtrooms didn't just see tension, they saw chaos. In October 2013, an 11-year-old boy stood before a judge in a courtroom. His name was withheld because of his age, but what he'd done and what he did next would go viral across the internet and land on news desks around the country. He was barely old enough to be in middle school, and yet there he stood, waiting to hear the consequences. For a plan that had nothing to do with childhood, what this boy had brought to school was staggering. After sentencing for bringing multiple guns and more than 400 rounds of ammunition to school, with the intent of killing several classmates, he jerked away from officers and ran towards the exit door shouting expletives. Multiple firearms and hundreds of rounds of live ammunition carried by an 11-year-old into a school building, with a plan to use them on other children. A child standing at barely 4.5 feet tall, hauling a bag loaded with enough firepower to sustain a prolonged firefight, walking into a school where other children his age were learning multiplication tables and reading chapter books. Investigators determined that this wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a dare. This child had selected specific classmates he intended to harm. The premeditation was disturbing on its own. The fact that it was coming from an 11-year-old brain made it something investigators and school officials had rarely encountered. When the court proceedings wrapped up and the boy heard the weight of what was coming down on him, something inside him snapped. He didn't cry. He didn't sit still. He violently jerked his arms away from the officers flanking him and launched himself toward the courtroom exit, screaming expletives at the top of his lungs. Bailiffs scrambled after him. The courtroom erupted in shock. Here was a child, legally too young to drive, too young to see a PG-13 movie alone, sprinting away from law enforcement in a room full of attorneys, court officers, and cameras. The video spread across the internet rapidly, but by the contradiction at the center of it. A kid who had coldly planned violence against his classmates, but who couldn't hold himself together for 30 seconds once accountability arrived. The screaming, the flailing arms, the desperate run for the door. It looked like a tantrum on the surface. This was a child whose plan to kill had been intercepted, and who now faced a system he wasn't equipped to process. Legal proceedings, especially criminal trials, often involve high stakes. This stress can trigger intense emotions that contribute to their inability to maintain composure in a courtroom setting. That assessment is clinical, but what it doesn't capture is the visceral, surreal quality of watching an 11-year-old scream obscenities and sprint through a courtroom, while officers chase after him like he's a fugitive on the run. The boy's age made the footage simultaneously terrifying and heartbreaking. Viewers watching the clip were divided sharply. Some pointed to the outburst as proof the child was beyond help. The case raised uncomfortable questions about juvenile justice, mental health screening, and the failure of systems designed to catch warning signs in children. The guns didn't materialize out of thin air. The ammunition didn't walk itself into his backpack. Someone, somewhere, had failed this boy. And the children he'd targeted, long before a judge ever laid eyes on him. The courtroom explosion was the end of a chain reaction that had started well before that day. And the whole thing, every second of the boy's meltdown, was captured on camera, preserved forever on the internet, attached to a child whose name was withheld by law, but whose face and voice became one of the most shared courtroom clips of that year. If there is one courtroom outburst involving a young person that the entire internet saw, it was Penelope Soto's. In February 2013, the 18-year-old stood before Miami-Dade Circuit Judge Jorge Rodriguez Chomat for a bond hearing. Soto was arrested for drug possession when she was allegedly found with Xanax in Florida. A quick hearing, a bond set, and a walk back to the holding area. Instead, it became one of the most watched courtroom videos in internet history. At Monday's hearing, Soto smiled and stroked her hair, and laughed when Rodriguez Chomat asked her about her jewelry and other assets for the purposes of setting her bond amount. It was immediately clear that Soto was not taking the proceedings seriously. She giggled at the judge's questions, played with her hair. The judge, a seasoned jurist who had seen plenty of defiant defendants, remained patient at first. Judge Rodriguez Chomat set a $5,000 bond and said bye-bye, to which Soto sniped adios. A $5,000 bond for a third-degree felony was, by most legal standards, reasonable. And that could have been the end of it. Soto could have walked away, posted bond, and carried on with her case. But the word adios delivered with a flippant laugh and a dismissive wave. Annoyed, the judge called her back. He doubled her bond from $5,000 to $10,000, a swift and immediate consequence for what he perceived as disrespect. Soto's playful demeanor cracked. The realization that she'd just cost herself real money hit her, but not hard enough to stop her from doing what she did next. After the girl, Penelope Soto responded by saying, "Fuck you," and gave him the middle finger. He sentenced her to 30 days in the county jail for criminal contempt of court. She walked away from the podium, turned around, stuck her middle finger straight up in the air, and shouted a two-word obscenity at the judge. The courtroom went silent for a beat, and then Rodriguez Chomat called her back one final time. But the altercation would not be complete without Soto flipping Judge Rodriguez Chomat the bird. For this, Judge Rodriguez Chomat yet again brought her back and issued her a 30-day criminal contempt of court sentence. The escalation was breathtaking in its speed. In less than 3 minutes, Soto had gone from a $5,000 bond on a possession charge to a $10,000 bond and 30 days in jail for contempt. She'd walked into that hearing facing a manageable legal situation and walked out of it in handcuffs, heading straight to a cell. But unlike other charges, a sentence for contempt can begin immediately, even before the case is heard. That means Soto will be waiting in jail for her hearing on the contempt charges, not to mention the extra bail that her behavior earned. The video exploded across the internet. Millions watched Soto's slide from cocky teenager to stunned defendant in real time. The general consensus was brutal. She'd done it to herself. The judge had been patient, even lenient. Soto appeared to be impaired by Xanax when she stood in front of her sentencing judge and received her punishment. The young lady made things much worse with an unprofessional attitude. After she hears the full extent of her punishment, it ceases to be funny, and she responds with some creative sign language. But the story didn't end with the viral clip. A few days later, Soto apologized to the judge, saying she was under the influence of Xanax and alcohol when she made the obscene gesture. 4 days after the incident, Soto returned to court. This time there was no hair stroking, no giggling, no flippant adios. At Friday's hearing, Soto paused as she apologized because she began to tear up. With tears, Soto smiled briefly at the judge. She told him she normally didn't act that way. She admitted she had taken Xanax the day of her arrest. The judge listened. He told her he hoped she had learned several lessons. After she apologized at a hearing 4 days later, he withdrew the contempt citations and urged her to seek drug counseling. The 30-day sentence was withdrawn. The bond was reset. Soto walked out. What's remarkable is that the story has a genuine resolution. State prosecutors dismissed the drug charges against Penelope Soto. Soto appeared before a drug court judge who said she successfully completed the drug court program. The judge even congratulated her and her mother, and they got applause from the courtroom. Soto completed the program. She was working toward her GED. The charges were dropped. A judge congratulated her in open court. The same girl who had flipped off a judge was standing in that same system, clapping along with the people who had once watched her self-destruct. Some courtroom outbursts are loud, screaming, cursing, bolting for the door. But Danta Wrights was quiet, and that made it worse. The teen who admitted to murdering Ann Arbor 18-year-old Jordan Klee sat smiling and nearly laughing as his victim's family members read impact statements before the court. In a Washtenaw County courtroom, the family of Jordan Klee, an 18-year-old whose life was taken during a robbery, stood before the court and poured their hearts into victim impact statements. They described what they'd lost: a child, a future, grandchildren that would never exist. And while they spoke, 17-year-old Danta Wright sat at the defense table and smiled. As a grieving mother's words were read aloud in that courtroom, the moment was captured by cameras, and the footage is deeply unsettling. There's no explosion, no chase, no shouting, just a teenager sitting in a chair, smiling through a murder sentencing, while a family tries to explain what it's like to bury their son, on behalf of the victim's grieving mother. Afterward, the defendant, 17-year-old Danta Wright, addressed the court saying, "I just want to tell y'all I'll be home soon. I love my family." That single sentence, "I'll be home soon," landed like a grenade in the courtroom. This was a teenager who had admitted to participating in a robbery that ended with another teenager's life being taken, and his response to a sentencing hearing was to announce, casually, that he'd be out soon. The audacity stunned the gallery. It stunned the judge. Wright admitted that he and two other friends were trying to rob 18-year-old Jordan Klee when he shot and killed him. The facts of the case were not in dispute. Wright and two accomplices had targeted Jordan Klee. What was supposed to be a robbery turned fatal when Wright fired a gun, ending Klee's life. The other two individuals involved also pleaded guilty, but Wright's demeanor in court stood apart from anything the judge had seen. The judge told Wright, "Watching you sit there, smile, laugh, shake your head like this was no big deal." The judge was on the verge of throwing out the plea deal entirely. Wright's behavior had pushed the proceedings to the edge. This was a kid who had admitted to murder, and his attitude in front of the court suggested he either didn't understand the gravity of what he'd done. Wright's lawyer apologized on behalf of the teen after the break, saying he suffers from emotional issues and that some people display fear by smiling. Wright was sentenced to 23 to 50 years in prison for Klee's murder. The defense's explanation that some people smile when they're afraid is a documented psychological response. Fear-based smiling is a real phenomenon, particularly among young people who lack the emotional vocabulary to process extreme situations. But to the victim's family, sitting in that courtroom, watching the person responsible for their son's death grin through their most painful moment, no psychological explanation could soften the blow. Wright's case exposes one of the most uncomfortable dynamics in juvenile justice: the gap between a teenager's emotional processing and the weight of what they've done. Whether Wright was truly afraid, truly indifferent, or somewhere in between, the visual of a 17-year-old smiling at a murder sentencing became one of the most discussed courtroom moments in Michigan legal history. The smile was louder than any scream could have been. The courtroom moments that haunt people the longest aren't always the loud ones. Sometimes, it's the silence that crawls under your skin and stays there. That's what happened in St. Johns County, Florida, when 16-year-old Aiden Fucci sat in a courtroom, while the consequences of what he'd done at 14 years old were laid bare for the world. A judge sentenced Aiden Fucci, the Florida teenager convicted of first-degree murder, for stabbing a 13-year-old over 100 times in 2021, to life in prison. Aiden Fucci was 14 when he stabbed Tristan Bailey more than 100 times on Mother's Day. 114 stab wounds on a 13-year-old girl on Mother's Day. The sheer brutality of the crime was difficult for seasoned investigators to process, let alone the general public. And at the center of it was a 14-year-old boy who, by every available assessment, had done it because he wanted to know what killing someone felt like. According to the trial court's findings, Fucci lured Bailey to a secluded area in the woods, where he stabbed her over 100 times. The court determined that Fucci acted with a desire to kill and watch someone die. The evidence showed that Bailey fought for her life, suffering 49 defensive wounds. Tristan Bailey didn't go quietly. 49 of her wounds were defensive. She fought back against her attacker with everything she had. A 13-year-old girl, ambushed in the woods by someone she knew, struggling to survive against a relentless assault. The forensic details presented in court painted a picture so horrific that even the judge, who had decades of experience, described it as the most difficult and shocking case St. Johns County had ever seen. Fucci, who was 14 at the time of the crime, pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, admitting to brutally stabbing Tristan Bailey more than 100 times in the woods at the end of a cul-de-sac in the quiet Durbin Crossing neighborhood. And that brings us to the courtroom, because this is where Aiden Fucci's behavior, or lack thereof, became a story in itself. Throughout the proceedings, Fucci displayed what observers described as a cold, almost detached demeanor. While Tristan Bailey's family poured their grief into the courtroom, Fucci sat still. He didn't cry. He didn't react. You'll hear firsthand the chilling details of Tristan's tragic death and bear witness to the cold, callous attitude displayed by Aiden Fucci throughout the investigation. The sentencing hearing stretched over multiple days and was a masterclass in courtroom emotion, not from the defendant, but from everyone around him. Tristan's sister, Alexis, began the day by methodically dropping 114 heart-shaped, aqua-colored stones into an empty jar on the witness stand. One for each of the 114 stab wounds that my sister had to endure, she said. One stone at a time. Clink, clink, clink. 114 times. The entire courtroom sat in silence as each small stone hit the glass, each one representing a wound inflicted on a child. It was one of the most devastating victim impact demonstrations anyone in that courtroom had ever witnessed. Tristan's mother, Stacy, said, "Aiden Fucci made a heinous decision on May 9, 2021, and took the very life that I brought into this world. Please do not for 1 second think that he could be rehabilitated at any point. He is beyond saving." In the end, Smith agreed, sentencing Fucci to life in prison. The judge's own words carried the weight of someone who had wrestled deeply with the decision before him. Smith added that the crime was especially troubling because it had no motive. This was not done out of greed. It was not done in retaliation, retribution, or revenge. It was not a crime of passion. It was not a crime that was committed because he felt rejected by her. It was not done in a fit of uncontrollable anger. There was no reason. There was no purpose. It was done for no other reason than to satisfy this defendant's internal desire to feel what it was like to kill someone. No greed, no anger, no passion, no reason at all, except curiosity. A 14-year-old boy killed a 13-year-old girl because he wanted to experience the act of taking a life. And when the moment came for him to face the court, he sat in near total silence while the system rendered its judgment. Fucci remains sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of sentence review after 25 years. Fucci's mom, Crystal Smith, was released from jail after serving a 30-day sentence in a plea deal. Crystal Smith was sentenced to 5 years of probation and 30 days in jail after pleading no contest to tampering with evidence. She had attempted to wash the blood off her son's jeans after the murder. Fucci's courtroom presence wasn't an outburst in the traditional sense. There was no screaming, no running, no obscene gestures, but the cold detachment of a teenage killer sitting motionless while a family described the annihilation of their world was, in many ways, the most disturbing courtroom behavior on this entire list. Sometimes going crazy in court means going completely, terrifyingly still. Sometimes it's not the defendant who goes crazy in court. Sometimes it's the people sitting behind them. And in March 2026, the courtroom of Judge Raquel West in Jefferson County, Texas, became the stage for one of the most shared courtroom outbursts in recent memory. Not from the 18-year-old being sentenced, but from the family who had come to support him. A Texas courtroom erupted in chaos as an 18-year-old learned his fate. Caden James Fontenette, convicted of aggravated robbery for his role in an October 2025 stick-up at a Nederland convenience store, was sentenced to 25 years in prison by Judge Raquel West of the 252nd District Court. 25 years for an 18-year-old. The sentence was massive, and Judge West knew it, but she had her reasons, and she laid every single one of them out in methodical detail before she pronounced it. The charges reportedly stem from Fontenette's role in a violent robbery and assault of a Bulldog Express convenience store clerk in Nederland in October 2025. Fontenette and 2 others used a gun to carry out the holdup. Surveillance video captured the moment one suspect brandished an apparent assault-style rifle and struck the clerk. This wasn't a shoplifting case. It wasn't petty theft. An assault-style rifle was involved. A store clerk was physically attacked. The surveillance footage showed the whole thing unfold in real time. Masked individuals storming in, a weapon brandished, a worker struck, and Fontenette was at the center of it. But what sealed the sentence wasn't just the crime itself. It was what Fontenette did while waiting for trial. During the sentencing, West turned to incidents in which Fontenette was caught fighting and jumping people while behind bars, describing him as high risk. So, it makes it very difficult for me to go, this is somebody that's going to get out and behave, who can follow the rules, because you can't even follow the rules in jail, West said. The judge pointed out the obvious problem. If you can't stay out of fights in a controlled environment where you're under surveillance 24 hours a day, what argument can anyone make that you'll behave on the outside? West continued, the presentence report shows you're at a high-risk level. That tells me that after they looked at everything, that you don't unfortunately have a good likelihood of being successful if I were to put you on probation. The moment West pronounced the 25-year sentence, the gallery behind Fontenette detonated. The moment of sentencing triggered an immediate reaction from Fontenette's family seated in the gallery. The video captures audible shouting and crying as the 25-year term was read. Members of the family can be heard losing composure. Their emotional outburst forced bailiffs to move toward the area and restore order. The shouting was raw and uncontainable. Family members wept openly, their voices rising above the courtroom decorum as the magnitude of the sentence crashed down on them. Bailiffs moved quickly, approaching the gallery area to restore order. The clip shows courtroom security personnel intervening as the chaos unfolds. Courtroom deputies can be seen approaching the gallery area as family members shout and cry. And here's the detail that makes the footage so striking. The family's emotional response stands in contrast to the defendant's demeanor during the sentencing. Fontanet, standing with his attorney, showed no visible reaction as the judge pronounced the 25-year term. The defendant himself didn't flinch. He stood still. His family screamed. He didn't move. The split screen of chaos behind him and silence in front of him is what made the video so compelling to millions of viewers. The video clip posted by Daily Loud and rapidly spreading across social media already amassed over 1.5 million views. The internet did what the internet does. It debated. Some argued the sentence was proportional to the violence of the crime. Others drew sharp comparisons. Critics of the sentence point to perceived disparities in the justice system. A reply with over 3,000 likes stated, "He got more time than anyone on the Epstein list." Another argued, 25 years for a convenience store robbery. White-collar criminals steal millions and get probation. Judge West, for her part, addressed the harshness directly. "You're still going to be young, and you can make your life better. That's going to be up to you." The Fontanet case is a reminder that courtroom outbursts don't always come from the defendant's mouth. Sometimes they come from the rows behind. From mothers and fathers and siblings who are watching a child they raised disappear into the system for a quarter of a century. The law doesn't account for a mother's scream. It doesn't measure a father's tears. It renders its judgment, and the gallery absorbs the shockwave. These cases span different states, different crimes, and different courtrooms. An 11-year-old bolting for the exit, an 18-year-old flipping off a judge, a 17-year-old smiling through a murder sentencing, a 14-year-old sitting in glacial silence. Courtroom outbursts occur when individuals involved in a legal proceeding, whether defendants, plaintiffs, their families, lawyers, or spectators, disrupt the court with unexpected emotional or aggressive actions. These outbursts can include shouting, crying, or making unscripted statements, as well as more extreme behaviors like physical altercations. That's the clinical definition. But what these cases show is something the textbooks don't fully capture. Young people process the weight of the justice system differently than adults. Some collapse under it. Some rage against it. Some shut down entirely and stare straight through it. And some, like Penelope Soto, walk into a courtroom one day and destroy their own case with a middle finger and 2 words, only to return months later as a completely different person. For defendants, an outburst can negatively influence their sentencing. Judges and juries might perceive the outburst as indicative of the defendant's character, potentially leading to harsher penalties. That's the risk. Every eye roll, every smirk, every curse word, it all factors in. Judges are human beings watching human behavior. And when a young defendant treats the courtroom like a stage for rebellion, the consequences extend far beyond the original charge. Contempt of court carries up to 6 months in county jail and $1,000 in fines, stacked on top of the original sentence. The system has teeth. Penelope Soto learned that in 3 minutes. The 11-year-old learned that while being chased through a courtroom. Danta Wright learned it when a judge nearly threw out his plea deal on the spot. But perhaps the most striking through line across all of these cases is this: the courtroom doesn't care how old you are. The gavel drops with the same weight whether you're 11 or 18. The cameras roll with the same indifference. And the internet preserves these moments with the kind of permanence that a young brain can't fully comprehend in the moment. Penelope Soto's middle finger lives on YouTube forever. The 11-year-old's scream is a permanent fixture of courtroom compilations. Danta Wright's smile is seared into the memory of a grieving family. Aiden Fucci's cold silence will follow him for the rest of his life sentence. These kids went crazy in court, but the system stayed exactly where it was, unmoved, unimpressed, and the gavel kept dropping,